The dazzling lights of the Zyron Confederacy's capital city reflected off the shimmering surface of the Galactic Summit Hall, where diplomatic talks between human and alien leaders were underway. Tensions between species had been high for years, and Princess Talia, one of the most outspoken leaders for peace, had become a symbol of hope across the galaxy. She had always believed that harmony between the different worlds was possible, even though her father, the stern Emperor of Zyron, disapproved of her progressive ideals, especially her growing closeness with human diplomats. But tonight, beneath the surface of the carefully constructed peace negotiations, a darker plan was set in motion. Talia was on her way to meet the human delegation when it happened. Moving through the quiet corridors of the summit hall, she was flanked by 2 Zyron guards when, without warning, the lights flickered and then died. Darkness enveloped her, and a moment later she felt a rush of cold air as the walls of the corridor cracked open. Before she could react, powerful hands grabbed her, pulling her into a concealed ship that had silently docked against the building. The guards were incapacitated before they even knew what was happening. She fought back, her heart racing as she realized who had taken her. The Kralians, a ruthless alien species feared throughout the galaxy for their merciless tactics and hunger for power. The Kralians had been waiting for the perfect moment to seize Talia, knowing full well the value of her child, her unborn child, fathered by a human diplomat. This child was the key to their plan, an interspecies heir who could be used as a pawn in their schemes to dominate the galactic political landscape. As the ship tore through the atmosphere, leaving the Zyron Confederacy behind, Talia's mind raced. She had been betrayed, but by whom? And how had the Kralians known about her secret? She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the small life growing inside her. She had fought for peace, for unity between the species, but now her child, the living embodiment of that hope, was in grave danger. They would use the child against her, against the very ideals she had spent her life defending. Talia was taken deep into Kralian territory, imprisoned on a barren, ice-cold outpost known as Blackstone, a facility designed to hold high-profile captives. The cold bit at her skin, the iron restraints cutting into her wrists as she was thrown into a dark cell. The Kralians had stripped her of her dignity, but they couldn't strip her of her will. She vowed, silently and fiercely, that she would escape, that she would protect her child, no matter the cost. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Eric Reiner of the Earth Alliance Special Forces sat in his quarters aboard the Vanguard, a sleek, state-of-the-art warship stationed in neutral space. He was deep in thought, his mind constantly drifting to the woman he had met months ago at a diplomatic summit. Princess Talia. They had shared brief but meaningful conversations about their hopes for peace between their worlds. There had been an unspoken connection, one that had lingered in his mind long after their meeting. He had admired her courage and her vision of unity, but it wasn't until he received the news of her abduction that he realized just how deeply he cared for her. The alert had come through moments ago. Princess Talia of Zyron, missing, presumed kidnapped by Kralian forces. Eric's heart froze in his chest. His mind immediately went into overdrive, thinking of every possible scenario, every angle. Why would the Kralians target her? Then, as he scrolled through the encrypted intelligence feeds, one detail caught his eye, a hidden report suggesting that Talia was pregnant. And not just with any child, rumors pointed to the father being a human diplomat. Eric's blood boiled. This wasn't just a random kidnapping, it was a political move. A vile scheme by the Kralians to manipulate both the Zyron Confederacy and the Earth Alliance. And Talia, along with her unborn child, was the key to their plan. He could not, would not, let that happen. Driven by a sense of duty and something far deeper, Eric requested an immediate audience with his commanding officer. He explained the situation in precise detail, insisting on a covert mission to rescue Talia. But the response from the Earth Alliance's command was as expected. They couldn't risk a full-scale conflict with the Kralians, not over a single hostage, even if she was a high-profile figure. Eric clenched his fists, barely containing his frustration. His superiors had no idea what was truly at stake here. This wasn't just about one life. This was about stopping the Kralians from gaining a political foothold that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. More than that, this was about protecting a woman who had become a symbol of hope, and, he realized, someone who meant more to him than he had ever admitted. As the official channels turned him away, Eric made his decision. If the Earth Alliance wouldn't act, then he would. Alone, under the cover of night, he prepared his gear and stole aboard the Starseeker, a small, agile stealth ship equipped with cloaking technology, perfect for infiltration. He had spent years in special operations, taking on missions behind enemy lines that no one else could. This mission was no different, except this time, it was personal. He had to find Talia. He had to save her. As the Starseeker entered hyperspace, its engines humming quietly, Eric sat at the helm, determination etched into every line of his face. His fingers brushed over the ship's controls, but his thoughts were focused on one thing: Talia's face, her strength, her defiance in the face of oppression. He vowed to himself and to her that he wouldn't let her fall into the Krallians' hands. He would save her, no matter what. And once she was safe, he would tell her how much she meant to him. But first, he had to get to Blackstone, the Krallian prison fortress where she was being held. It was a fortress known for being impenetrable, but Eric wasn't concerned with the odds. He had faced impossible missions before. This would be just another in a long line. But deep down, he knew this was more than that. This was a rescue mission that could change the galaxy, and he would not fail. The Starseeker drifted silently through the vast blackness of space, its cloaking technology rendering it invisible to all but the most advanced scanning equipment. Inside the cockpit, Captain Eric Reiner stared intently at the holographic display before him, the faint outline of the Blackstone prison fortress slowly coming into view. The Krallian outpost loomed like a malevolent shadow, its jagged towers cutting through the frozen atmosphere of the planet below. The cold, harsh environment was a fitting reflection of the cruelty inside. Eric had studied the Krallian stronghold for days, poring over stolen blueprints, memorizing every detail. The fortress was a maze of deadly corridors, armed guards, and advanced security systems. But Eric wasn't deterred. He had infiltrated enemy bases before, but this was different. The stakes had never been this personal. Talia, the woman he had risked everything for, was somewhere inside, and time was running out. He navigated the ship with precision, slipping past the orbital patrols and anti-intrusion sensors. As the Starseeker approached the shadowed side of the fortress, Eric activated the ship's landing gear, descending into a blind spot on the planet's surface. Snow whipped violently around the ship as it touched down, the freezing wind howling outside. Blackstone's icy surface was hostile, an uninviting wasteland that had swallowed many lives before. Eric checked his gear one final time: stealth suit, thermal weaponry, EMP grenades, and a prototype hacking device designed specifically for Krallian tech. His heart pounded with anticipation, but his mind was clear and focused. This was what he was trained for: silent infiltration, precise execution. But beneath the soldier's calm exterior, there was a fire burning, a fierce need to see Talia safe, to get her and her unborn child far away from this nightmare. Exiting the ship, the cold bit at his exposed skin, but Eric didn't slow. He moved with the precision of a shadow, making his way to a concealed entrance used by maintenance drones. The plan was risky. Once inside, he would have limited time to locate Talia and escape before the Krallians realized something was wrong. With deft hands, Eric used his hacking device to bypass the fortress's outer security protocols. The heavy metal door slid open with a soft hiss, and he slipped inside, immediately engulfed in the cold, sterile air of Blackstone's interior. The dimly lit hallways stretched before him, a labyrinth of steel and shadow. As he moved deeper into the fortress, he encountered the first set of guards, 2 Krallians standing watch near a security checkpoint. Eric's muscles tensed, his hand reaching for the blaster at his hip. But he knew that a firefight this early would ruin the mission. Instead, he waited in the darkness, watching their movements, studying their patterns. When the moment was right, he struck. A quick dart of his EMP grenade disabled the security systems, and within seconds, the 2 guards were unconscious, taken out with silent precision. Eric moved quickly, dragging their bodies into a side alcove before continuing his mission. Each step took him deeper into the heart of the fortress, his pulse quickening as he approached the detention level. Talia was close. He could feel it. As he turned a corner, he saw it, the heavy reinforced door to the detention block, guarded by a pair of elite Krallian soldiers. Their crimson armor gleamed under the dim lights, and Eric knew he wouldn't be able to sneak past them this time. He prepared himself, tightening his grip on his blaster. Then, the unexpected happened. A voice crackled over the intercom system, Princess Talia's voice. "All those listening in the darkness of Blackstone," she said, her voice a mix of strength and defiance. "Know this. I will not be broken. No matter what the Krallians do to me, I will protect the life growing inside me. My child will never be used as a pawn in their twisted games." Her words sent a shiver down Eric's spine. She was still fighting, even after everything she had endured. He felt a renewed surge of determination. Talia's voice continued to echo through the halls, but Eric focused on the guards in front of him. He had to act now. With swift, calculated movements, Eric threw a smoke grenade toward the guards, the dense cloud enveloping them before they could react. He rushed forward, dispatching them in seconds, their armor clattering to the ground as they fell. The heavy door to the detention block stood before him, its locks and security measures active. But Eric's hacking device made quick work of the defenses, and within moments, the door slid open. Inside, the detention area was cold and dimly lit. Cells lined both sides of the corridor, and Eric's heart pounded as he scanned each one. Finally, at the far end of the hall, he saw her. Princess Talia. She stood, tall and proud, despite her ragged appearance. Her once brilliant royal gown was torn and dirty, her face pale from weeks of confinement. But her eyes, the fire in her eyes was still there, burning fiercely, and her hand, gently resting on her swollen belly, was a reminder of the life she was fighting to protect. "Talia," Eric whispered, rushing to the cell's door. Her eyes widened in shock. "Eric? I'm getting you out of here," he said, working quickly to unlock the cell. "We don't have much time." Talia stepped forward as the door swung open, her hand reaching out to touch his face as if to confirm he was real. "You came for me. I didn't think anyone would." Eric's hand covered hers, his voice soft but determined. "I'll always come for you." For a moment, they stood there, face to face, in the silence of the dim detention block. Talia's heart raced, and she blinked back tears as she looked into Eric's eyes that were full of fierce determination, compassion, and something deeper. She had imagined this moment in her darkest hours, but hadn't allowed herself to truly believe it would come. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Eric shook his head, his hand still resting gently on her arm. "I would have gone to the ends of the galaxy to find you, Talia. There's no place they could take you that I wouldn't follow." Her hand instinctively went to her belly, where the baby kicked faintly beneath her touch. "I feared, for both of us. The Krallians know about the child. They want to use the baby as leverage, to control the galaxy's alliances." Eric's face hardened with resolve. "We're not going to let that happen. I'm getting you out of here, and we're going to make sure they never touch you or the child again." Talia nodded, trusting him completely. She had seen what he was capable of, the soldier, the protector. But standing before him now, she felt more than just relief. There was something deeper, something undeniable about the connection between them. In that moment, she knew that Eric was more than just her savior. He was her anchor. "Do you have a way out?" Talia asked, her voice steadying as she prepared herself for what came next. Eric nodded, his eyes scanning the hallway behind them. "My ship is cloaked and waiting just beyond the perimeter. We need to move fast before the Krallians realize what's happened." As they moved through the fortress, Eric kept a sharp eye on their surroundings, his blaster ready at his side. Talia followed closely behind, her senses on high alert as they weaved through corridors and maintenance tunnels. The sound of distant footsteps and Krallian voices echoed through the cold walls, but Eric's keen instincts kept them one step ahead of their pursuers. They reached a security checkpoint near the main hangar, where Krallian soldiers were beginning to stir, realizing something was amiss. Eric gestured for Talia to stay behind a nearby pillar as he prepared to disable the guards. He moved with the swift precision of a veteran soldier, incapacitating them silently before they could raise the alarm. "Come on," he whispered, motioning for Talia to follow. The tension mounted as they approached the outer doors. Just beyond the next room lay freedom, Eric's ship and their chance to escape. But as they reached the final hallway, a shrill alarm suddenly blared through the fortress, and red lights flashed overhead. "They know we're here," Eric muttered, gripping his blaster tightly. "We're going to have to fight our way out." Talia nodded, her heart racing, as the sound of approaching guards filled the air. They had come too far to be stopped now. The door in front of them slid open, revealing a squad of Krallian soldiers rushing toward them, their weapons drawn. Eric raised his blaster, his stance steady and unshakable. "Stay behind me," he said. Talia watched in awe as Eric moved into action, his blaster firing with deadly accuracy. He took down the first wave of Krallians with ease, his movements fluid and precise. The intensity of the firefight didn't faze him, and Talia realized just how much she trusted him, how much she believed that he would protect her, no matter the odds. But the Krallians kept coming, their numbers growing with each second. Eric gritted his teeth, knowing they were running out of time. He reached for Talia, pulling her closer as they ducked behind a nearby barricade to avoid another volley of fire. "I need to get you to the ship," Eric said, his voice urgent. "We're almost there." Talia's eyes met his, and in that moment she felt a surge of emotion. Fear, yes, but also love. She didn't need to say anything. Eric saw it in her eyes, felt it in the way she held on to him. "We're going to make it," he promised, his voice low but filled with determination. "I won't let them take you." With a final push, Eric led her toward the hangar bay, firing back at the Krallians with precision. Talia stayed close, her heart pounding, trusting him completely. The doors to the hangar slid open, revealing the cloaked Starseeker, waiting just beyond. Freedom was within reach. The heavy doors to the hangar bay slid open with a hiss, and the icy air of the planet outside rushed in, biting at Talia's skin. Beyond the doors, Eric's ship, the Starseeker, hovered just beyond the perimeter, its engines humming quietly, cloaked but waiting for them. It was the last obstacle standing between them and freedom. But they weren't alone. As soon as the doors opened, the sound of boots hitting the metal floor echoed from the far side of the hangar. A squad of heavily armed Krallian soldiers poured into the room, their weapons raised, eyes gleaming with cold malice. Talia's heart pounded as she clutched Eric's arm, her mind racing. She could feel the baby stirring inside her, as if sensing the danger. "We have to move," Eric whispered, pulling her behind a stack of crates for cover. His voice was calm, but she could hear the urgency underneath. He raised his blaster, scanning the area for an opening. "Stay low. I'll get you to the ship." Talia nodded, trusting him completely. Her legs trembled with fatigue, but she steeled herself. This was the moment. They couldn't afford to fail. Without warning, the Krallians opened fire, the sound of plasma blasts filling the air as red energy bolts ripped through the hangar. Eric's quick reflexes kicked in, returning fire with precise, calculated shots that dropped several of the enemy soldiers. He moved with the precision of a trained soldier, each step deliberate, each shot deadly. But the Krallians had the advantage in numbers. More troops flooded in from the far doors, and Eric knew that a direct confrontation would only end in disaster. They needed to get to the ship. Now. "Follow me," Eric said, grabbing Talia's hand. He led her around the edge of the hangar, staying low behind crates and machinery, using the shadows to their advantage. The Krallians were advancing, but Eric's quick thinking kept them a few steps ahead. Every step brought them closer to the Starseeker. A blast struck the wall behind them, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Talia flinched, but Eric pulled her close, shielding her with his body. "We're almost there," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Just a little further." Talia nodded, her grip tightening on his arm. She could see the silhouette of the Starseeker now, its form barely visible against the darkened landscape beyond the hangar doors. Hope surged within her. Freedom was so close, just a few more steps. But the Krallians weren't giving up without a fight. As they neared the open hangar doors, a massive figure stepped into their path. A Krallian commander, clad in gleaming black armor, loomed over them, his plasma rifle trained on Eric and Talia. His glowing red eyes flickered with cruel amusement. "You're not going anywhere, human," the commander sneered, his voice like gravel. Eric tensed, his blaster aimed directly at the commander's chest. Talia could feel his body coiled like a spring, ready to act. But the commander wasn't alone. Behind him, more Krallians fanned out, their weapons drawn, blocking their path to freedom. For a moment, everything was still. The tension was palpable, the air crackling with danger. Then, in a blur of motion, Eric lunged. His blaster fired, and the Krallian commander staggered backward, his armor sparking from the impact. But the commander didn't fall. With a roar, he raised his rifle and fired. Eric grabbed Talia, pulling her out of the line of fire as the plasma bolts seared past them. The commander advanced, swinging his massive rifle like a club. Eric dodged the blow, countering with a quick strike to the commander's exposed neck, but the Krallian was relentless, his strength overwhelming. Talia's heart raced as she watched the brutal fight unfold. Eric was holding his own, but she could see the strain in his movements. They couldn't stay here. The Krallians were closing in, and every second wasted brought them closer to being captured again. "I have to do something," she whispered to herself. With a burst of adrenaline, Talia grabbed one of the discarded blasters from the ground and aimed it at the Krallian commander. Her hands shook, but her resolve was steady. She squeezed the trigger, and a bolt of energy shot toward the commander, striking him in the side. He roared in pain, stumbling backward. Eric seized the opportunity, delivering a swift kick to the commander's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Without wasting a second, he turned to Talia, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, breathless but determined. "Let's go." They sprinted the last few steps to the Starseeker, the Krallians firing after them. Eric activated the ship's ramp, and they dove inside just as the hangar filled with plasma fire. The ramp sealed shut behind them, and Eric rushed to the cockpit, his fingers flying over the controls. "Hold on," he shouted as the ship's engines roared to life. The Starseeker lifted off the ground, its cloaking systems engaging just as the Krallians fired a barrage of missiles toward them. Eric swerved the ship sharply, the missiles exploding harmlessly against the hangar's walls as the ship shot into the sky. Talia collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, her chest heaving with relief. "We made it," she whispered, her heart still racing. Eric glanced over at her, his expression softening. "We did," he said quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But it's not over yet." The Starseeker rocketed away from the Krallian outpost, cutting through the atmosphere and into the cold, dark void of space. But as they left the planet behind, Talia could see several Krallian fighters on the radar, already in pursuit. "They're not giving up," she said, her voice laced with worry. Eric's jaw tightened as he adjusted their course. "They won't stop until we're clear of Krallian space. I need to get us to hyperspace, but they'll try to block our jump." Talia nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. They had escaped the fortress, but the Krallians wouldn't rest until she and her child were either recaptured or dead, and Eric was putting his life on the line to save them both. "Do what you need to do," she said, her voice filled with trust. "I'm with you." Eric smiled faintly, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "We'll get through this," he promised. As the Starseeker hurtled through space, the Krallian fighters closed in, their weapons lighting up the darkness with deadly precision. Eric pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through asteroid fields and debris, dodging plasma fire with expert maneuvers. But the Krallians were relentless. "We need more speed," Eric muttered, his hands moving quickly over the controls. "If they get a lock on us—" Before he could finish, the radar screen blinked red. A Krallian cruiser had jumped in ahead of them, blocking their hyperspace route. It loomed large in front of them, its weapons already powering up for a full assault. "They're trying to trap us," Talia said, her heart pounding. Eric's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the cruiser, and if they engaged in a full fight, the Starseeker wouldn't stand a chance against its firepower. He needed another way out, something the Krallians wouldn't expect. Then, an idea sparked. "I've got one last trick," Eric said, his voice firm with resolve, "but it's going to be close." He punched in a series of commands, rerouting the ship's energy reserves to the engines. The Starseeker groaned under the strain, its systems pushed beyond their limits. But Eric's plan wasn't to fight or run. It was to fake their destruction. As the Krallian cruiser fired its first salvo of plasma torpedoes, Eric steered the ship directly toward a dense asteroid field. At the last second, he powered down the engines, making it look as though the Starseeker had been hit. The ship careened into the asteroid field, disappearing from the cruiser's sensors as it blended in with the debris. For a tense moment, silence filled the cockpit. The Krallian fighters hovered just outside the field, scanning for signs of life. But after a few agonizing minutes, the fighters disengaged, convinced that their target had been destroyed. Eric let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They're gone. Talia exhaled in relief, her body finally relaxing. You did it, Eric smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. We did it. The Starseeker drifted through the quiet emptiness of space, finally free from pursuit. Eric set a course for a small, uncharted system on the fringes of known space, a place where they could lay low and plan their next move. The adrenaline from the escape had worn off, and now the reality of everything that had happened weighed heavily on both of them. Talia sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the viewport. The flickering lights of distant worlds seemed so far away, yet now, in the safety of the ship, she felt something new: hope. Despite the danger, despite the overwhelming odds, she and Eric had survived. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the soft, reassuring movement of her child. How are you feeling? Eric asked softly, breaking the silence. Talia smiled faintly, glancing over at him. Tired, relieved, grateful. She paused, her voice growing more serious. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come for me, Eric. I thought I'd never get out of that place. Eric leaned back in his seat, his gaze steady. You're safe now, that's all that matters. Talia looked down at her hands, a wave of emotion washing over her. I've never felt so afraid before, not just for me but for the child. The Krallians were going to use us as pawns, control the galaxy with my baby as leverage. She shuddered at the thought. Eric's expression hardened. They'll never get that chance. I swear to you, Talia, I won't let anyone hurt you or the baby. Not while I'm around. There was a sincerity in his words that struck Talia deeply. She had always known Eric to be brave, strong, and determined, but in this moment, she realized just how much he cared. His presence had become her anchor, his protection a shield against the darkness of the galaxy. And more than that, there was something between them. Something undeniable. Talia turned to face him fully, her heart pounding in her chest. Eric, why did you come for me? Why did you risk everything, go against orders, to save me? Eric's eyes softened as he looked at her, a silence settling between them. He had been asking himself the same question ever since he set out on this mission. But now, sitting here with her, the answer was clear. I came for you because I care about you, he said, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. More than I've ever cared about anyone. I couldn't let you go through that alone, and I couldn't let them take your child. Our future. Talia's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the same connection, the same pull. But hearing him say the words made it real. Eric, Before she could finish, Eric reached out and gently took her hand. You don't have to say anything, he whispered. But know this, I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Talia smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with emotion. She had fought so hard for peace, for a future where humans and Thalians could live in harmony, and now, in the quiet of the Starseeker, she realized that this, what they shared, was the future she had been fighting for. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him softly. It was a kiss full of gratitude, love, and hope for what lay ahead. When they finally pulled away, Talia rested her forehead against his, a soft smile on her lips. We'll get through this, she whispered. Together. Eric smiled, his heart filled with warmth. Always. As the ship glided through the stars, leaving the dangers of the past behind, they both knew that their journey wasn't over. There were still battles to fight, still dangers to face, but for now, they had each other. And that was enough. They had found their safe haven, in each other. The peaceful moments aboard the Starseeker had not lasted long. Just as Eric and Talia had begun to settle into the calm after their daring escape, an urgent beeping from the ship's control panel shattered the quiet. Eric's brow furrowed as he glanced at the display. A fleet of ships had dropped out of hyperspace near their location. And they weren't friendly. Krallian hunters. Damn it, Eric muttered under his breath, slamming his fist onto the console. They must have tracked us after all. Talia's heart clenched as she looked at the radar screen. The Krallians had dispatched not just a few fighters, but an entire battalion of warships to hunt them down. She could feel the weight of her situation pressing down on her. The Krallians wouldn't stop until she and her unborn child were back in their clutches. "Can we outrun them?" Talia asked, her voice calm but tense. Eric was already plotting a course through a nearby asteroid field. Dangerous, but their only chance. "We'll have to. If we don't lose them in the asteroid belt, we're dead in the water." The Starseeker's engines roared to life as Eric pushed the ship to maximum speed, racing toward the swirling mass of asteroids looming ahead. The Krallian ships were closing in fast, their weapons systems locked onto the fleeing vessel. Eric's hands flew over the controls, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire that lit up the space around them. Talia strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had fought hard to escape the Krallians once, and she wasn't about to go back. Not after everything she and Eric had been through. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, as if to reassure her unborn child that they would get through this. "I've got an idea," Talia said, her voice strong despite the fear gnawing at her. "The asteroid field is dense, but the Krallians won't follow us in too deep. They'll risk damaging their ships. We can use that to our advantage." Eric glanced over at her, admiration flickering in his eyes. Even under immense pressure, Talia was thinking tactically. "You're right," he said, his focus never wavering. "But it's going to be a tight squeeze." As the Starseeker plunged into the asteroid field, the ship rocked violently from the turbulence. Massive chunks of rock spun wildly through space, their jagged edges threatening to tear the ship apart. Eric expertly navigated through the deadly terrain, his reflexes razor-sharp as he dodged and weaved between the tumbling debris. Behind them, the Krallian warships hesitated, their commanders unwilling to risk their heavily armored vessels in such dangerous conditions. A few smaller fighters continued the pursuit, but the bulk of the fleet pulled back, waiting on the outskirts of the asteroid field. "Looks like we've thinned the herd," Eric said, though his voice remained tense. "But those fighters are still on us." Talia's mind raced, trying to think of a way to give them an edge. "What if we lure them deeper in? There's a high-energy plasma storm near the core of the asteroid field. It'll interfere with their systems, but we'll need to be careful not to get caught ourselves." Eric nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. "Let's do it." With a sharp turn, he steered the Starseeker deeper into the asteroid belt, the ship groaning under the strain as they maneuvered through tighter spaces. The Krallian fighters followed, their weapons firing in erratic bursts as they struggled to keep up. But as they approached the plasma storm, the energy interference became apparent. Systems flickered, and targeting arrays failed, leaving the Krallians flying blind. "We're in their blind spot," Eric said, glancing at Talia. "Now's our chance." He dove the ship into a dense cluster of asteroids, using the chaotic environment to mask their escape. The Krallian fighters, disoriented by the storm, veered off course, crashing into the asteroids one by one. In a matter of moments, the pursuing fighters had been eliminated. Talia exhaled in relief as the last blip on the radar disappeared. "That was close," she said, her voice steady despite the lingering tension. Eric smiled faintly, his grip on the controls finally relaxing. "Too close, but you were brilliant." Talia smiled back, though her thoughts were still heavy with concern. They had escaped for now, but the Krallians wouldn't give up so easily. The battalion was still waiting for them outside the asteroid field, and eventually they would have to leave the relative safety of the rocks. "We need somewhere to hide. Regroup," Talia said, thinking aloud. "Somewhere the Krallians wouldn't think to look." Eric thought for a moment before his eyes brightened with an idea. "I know a place, a neutral world on the far edge of known space. It's off the grid, and the Krallians wouldn't dare attack it openly." Talia nodded, her hope renewed. "Then that's where we'll go." Hours later, the Starseeker touched down on the barren surface of Orionis Five, a remote planet known for its neutrality and isolation. It was a safe haven for those seeking refuge from the galaxy's many conflicts, a place where no one asked questions and everyone was simply trying to survive. The Krallians, bound by their treaties, would not dare invade the planet, at least not without drawing the ire of other powerful factions. As they stepped off the ship, the dry, dusty wind of Orionis V whipped at their faces. The landscape was stark, endless stretches of desert and jagged rock formations, with only the occasional settlement scattered in the distance. "This place doesn't look like much," Talia said, pulling her cloak tighter against the wind, "but I suppose that's the point." Eric chuckled softly. "It's not glamorous, but it's safe." They made their way to a small, hidden enclave on the outskirts of the main settlement, a quiet place where they could lay low for a while and gather their strength. The locals barely paid them any attention, more concerned with their own survival than with the newcomers in their midst. As night fell, Eric and Talia sat together in the small shelter they had secured, the distant lights of the settlement flickering like stars against the dark horizon. For the first time in what felt like ages, there was a sense of calm between them. "We've come so far," Talia said softly, staring out at the vast, empty landscape. "But I can't shake the feeling that we're not safe yet. The Crawlians won't stop until they have me, or the baby." Eric reached over, taking her hand in his. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time. Right now we're safe, and that's what matters." Talia turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "I don't know how to thank you, Eric. You've risked everything for me, for us." Eric's gaze softened as he met her eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Talia. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat." For a moment, the weight of everything they had been through hung in the air between them. The danger, the fear, the constant running. It had all brought them closer in ways neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a rescue mission had become something much more. Talia took a deep breath, her voice quiet but steady. "There's something I need to tell you." Eric's brow furrowed in concern. "What is it?" Talia hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand on her belly. "This child, it's not just a symbol of peace, it's a symbol of our future. And that future, it's with you." Eric's heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. He had always known there was something between them, but hearing it now from her, in this moment, it made everything clear. "Talia," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she said, her voice soft and full of warmth. "But I want you to know, I love you. I have for a long time." Eric's heart swelled with emotion as he reached up to gently cup her face. "I love you too, Talia, more than anything." In that moment, all the fear, the uncertainty, the danger, they all melted away. It was just the two of them, bound together by something stronger than any force in the galaxy. Eric leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a soft, tender kiss. Talia responded, her heart pounding with love and relief. For the first time in weeks, they felt at peace. As they pulled apart, Talia rested her head against Eric's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We'll face whatever comes next," she whispered, her voice full of quiet strength. "Together." Eric held her close, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Always. But even as they found solace in each other's arms, the weight of their situation lingered. The Crawlians were still out there, and their pursuit would never truly end. Their love was a powerful force, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. The temporary peace Eric and Talia had found on Orionis Fief was shattered within days. The Crawlians, relentless in their pursuit, had tracked them to the neutral world, violating every intergalactic treaty in their desperation to capture Talia and her unborn child. Eric was the first to notice the disturbance, a fleet of Crawlian ships descending through the planet's atmosphere like dark clouds blotting out the sky. "We've been found," Eric said, his voice grim as he stared at the growing threat through the window of their shelter. Talia's heart sank, fear gripping her as she moved to Eric's side. She had known deep down that their escape wouldn't last forever, but the sight of the Crawlian warships closing in made everything feel so much more real. The Crawlians weren't just chasing them, they were declaring war. Eric grabbed his blaster, determination etched across his face. "We need to move. Now." But as they hurried to gather their belongings, the air outside was already filled with the thunder of descending dropships. The Crawlians had come prepared, deploying squads of elite soldiers into the settlement. Orionis V's neutrality was meaningless to them now. All that mattered was capturing Talia. Eric's mind raced. There was no time to flee, No way to outrun the sheer number of Kralians pouring into the settlement, but he couldn't let them take Talia. Not again. "Get to the ship," Eric said, his voice tight with urgency. "I'll hold them off." Talia shook her head, her hand gripping his arm. "No, I'm not leaving you." Eric met her gaze, his expression softening for a brief moment. "You have to. I won't let them take you, Talia. Not after everything we've been through." "I can't lose you," Talia whispered, her eyes brimming with emotion. Eric cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away the tear that slipped down her cheek. "You won't, but you need to get to safety, for our child." Talia hesitated, her heart torn between the man she loved and the safety of their unborn child. But deep down she knew Eric was right. She had to survive, for both of them. "Promise me you'll come back to me," she said, her voice trembling. "I promise," Eric said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Now go." Talia nodded, her heart heavy, and hurried out of the shelter, making her way toward the hidden entrance to the Starseeker. She could hear the sounds of battle erupting around her. The Kralians were already engaging with the local defense forces, their weapons lighting up the darkened streets. Talia's pulse quickened as she darted through the shadows, her hand instinctively going to her belly, protecting the life growing within her. Meanwhile, Eric moved to intercept the incoming Kralian troops. His blaster fired with deadly precision as he took down several soldiers, using the natural cover of the rocky terrain to his advantage. But for every Kralian he dispatched, more seemed to pour in, relentless and ruthless in their pursuit. The settlement was quickly becoming a battlefield, with explosions echoing through the air and blaster fire crisscrossing the streets. The Kralians were out for blood, and Eric knew they wouldn't stop until they had Talia. But he wasn't going to let that happen. As Eric continued to fight, he noticed the largest Kralian ship descending toward the center of the settlement. Its sleek, black hull gleamed under the planet's twin moons, and Eric's stomach churned as he realized what or who was aboard. Commander Vrax. The brutal leader of the Kralian forces, Commander Vrax was known for his merciless tactics and unwavering loyalty to the Empire. If he was here, it meant the Kralians weren't just trying to capture Talia, they were making this personal. Eric's mind raced. If he could take out Vrax, the Kralians might retreat. But the commander was heavily guarded, and Eric was running low on ammunition. There was only one option left. With grim determination, Eric made his way toward the Kralian dropship, weaving through the chaos of the battlefield. He could see Vrax now, standing tall in his black armor, barking orders to his soldiers as they pushed forward. Eric's pulse quickened as he raised his blaster, aiming for the commander. But before he could fire, a Kralian soldier blindsided him, knocking Eric to the ground. His blaster skittered out of reach, and the soldier's heavy boot pressed into his chest, pinning him down. The Kralian raised his weapon, preparing to finish him off. Suddenly, a blaster shot rang out, and the Kralian soldier collapsed to the ground, a smoking hole in his chest. Eric looked up, his heart racing, to see Talia standing a few feet away, a discarded Kralian blaster in her hands, her face fierce with determination. She had come back for him. "Talia!" Eric shouted, scrambling to his feet. "We're not doing this without each other," Talia said, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. "In this together." Eric's heart swelled with both love and admiration. "Then let's end this." They moved together side by side as they fought their way toward Vrax's position. Talia's aim was true, each shot a testament to her will to survive, to protect her child. Eric covered her, his tactical mind guiding them through the fray, closer and closer to the Kralian commander. Finally, they reached Vrax. The massive Kralian turned toward them, his red eyes narrowing as he recognized Talia. "You," he growled, his voice dripping with disdain. "The runaway princess, you're coming with me." Eric stepped in front of Talia, his blaster aimed at Vrax's chest. "Not today." With a roar, Vrax charged, his plasma blade igniting in a blaze of purple light. The fight was brutal. Vrax's strength was overwhelming, but Eric's speed and precision kept him just out of reach of the deadly blade. Talia, keeping her distance, fired whenever she could, but Vrax's armor deflected most of the shots. The battle seemed to stretch on forever. Each moment a blur of motion and danger. But Eric's determination never wavered. This was the moment he had prepared for, the moment he had vowed to protect Talia at all costs. In a final desperate move, Eric sidestepped one of Vrax's powerful swings, dodging the plasma blade by inches. With a quick, fluid motion, he grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt and shoved it into the weak spot in Vrax's armor, just below his ribs. "Goodbye, Vrax," Eric muttered, leaping backward as the grenade detonated. The explosion rocked the battlefield, and Vrax staggered, his massive form collapsing as smoke billowed from the gaping wound in his armor. The Krallian forces, seeing their commander fall, hesitated for the first time. Panic rippled through their ranks. Eric turned to Talia, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We need to go. Now." Talia nodded, her heart pounding as they made a break for the Starseeker. Behind them, the Krallians were in disarray, retreating in the wake of their commander's death. But Eric and Talia didn't stop to look back. They had survived. They had won. The Starseeker soared through the peaceful blackness of space, far from Orionis Vith and the chaos they had left behind. Eric and Talia sat together in the cockpit, the adrenaline of the battle slowly fading, replaced by a deep sense of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," Talia whispered, her hand resting on her belly, her voice filled with quiet wonder. Eric smiled, leaning back in his seat, the weight of their victory settling over him. "We did." The Krallians had been defeated, their commander slain, and their forces scattered. For the first time in what felt like ages, Talia and Eric could breathe, knowing that they were truly free. But as they drifted through the stars, their thoughts turned to the future. They had escaped the clutches of the Krallians, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. There were still those who would seek to exploit Talia's child, still forces that would try to tear them apart. Yet, as Eric looked at Talia, her strength and determination shining brighter than ever, he knew that they could face whatever came next. "I love you," he said softly, his voice full of emotion, "and I'll protect you both, always." Talia smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I love you too, Eric. And I know, no matter what happens, we'll face it together." They sat in peaceful silence for a moment, the stars stretching out before them like a tapestry of endless possibilities. Then, without hesitation, Eric reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn ring. It wasn't much, a simple band he had carried with him for years, but in this moment it was everything. "Talia," Eric said, his voice steady and sure. "Marry me. Let's build a future together. A future for us, for our child, a future where we don't have to run anymore." Talia's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. She nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, I'll marry you." Eric slipped the ring onto her finger, his heart pounding with love and relief. This was their new beginning. As the Starseeker continued its journey through the stars, carrying them toward a future of hope and possibility, Eric and Talia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. They had found love in the darkest corners of the galaxy, and together they would create a new horizon for themselves and their child. A horizon filled with peace, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.